On the day I returned from a 5-year top-secret assignment, I found my 6-year-old son, Jacob, tied to a dog leash, eating from a dog bowl, my husband's family, cradling his mistress, baby in their arms, cursed my son, calling him a curse on their house, and I decided I would throw every last one of them out onto the street. Dragging a heavy suitcase behind me, I walked up the gravel path leading to the gates of a sprawling white mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. 5 long years had passed. I had been overseas working on a classified government project, and for those 5 years, I had to sever all contact, forced to leave my little boy, who was only a year old at the time. Now, my Jacob was 6. He must have grown so much, become so smart, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I had informed my husband, Chris, and my mother-in-law, Elizabeth, of my return, telling them for a week, yet no one was waiting for me at the airport. Now an unnatural, deathly silence hung over the house, the door unlocked. With a trembling heart, I pushed it open carefully, ready to break into the widest smile, but instead of welcoming laughter, or Jacob's voice calling out, "Mommy," the first thing that reached my ears was my mother-in-law's cold, saccharine voice. "Oh, you are a little treasure, our beloved grandson. Sleep well, my little angel. You're a true blessing to this family. Ever since you were born, your dad's business has been booming like never before." My heart stopped, then started hammering against my ribs. "Treasure, Daddy." I stood motionless, slowly stepping over the threshold. In the luxurious living room sat Chris, who had gained weight, looking even more pleased with himself. Next to him sat a young, beautiful woman, and he was smiling at her, a happy, radiant smile, one he hadn't shown me once in the last 5 years. My mother-in-law was tenderly cuddling an infant wrapped in expensive silk blankets, and they hadn't noticed me yet, leaving me feeling like a ghost in my own home. Then I heard a faint bark, and the clinking of a chain coming from the backyard, a steel grip squeezing my heart, so I walked through the living room, all 3 of them still mesmerized by their treasure, and looked through the large glass doors leading to the garden where I had once planted dozens of rose bushes, and that's when I saw it, a scene straight from hell. Under the plum tree stood a naked boy, starved to the bone, his skin barely covering his tiny skeleton, a metal chain clamped around his neck, a dog collar, the chain leading to an old, filthy doghouse, the boy on all fours, fighting with our German shepherd over scraps of food. Just then, Elizabeth stepped outside with the infant, probably to get some sun. Seeing the scene, she not only failed to react, but snorted with laughter and kicked a bone onto the ground, her voice lingly cold and sharp. "Eat up, you little monster, useless freeloader." The dirty, skinny child lifted his head, his eyes terrified, wild like a trapped animal's. But it was my son, 6-year-old Jacob, whom I had missed for 5 long years. The suitcase I was holding crashed to the floor, my vision went dark, and the world spun. The loud noise made the 3 in the living room turn abruptly, Elizabeth, Chris, and the strange woman staring at me in horror. "So, Sophia," my mother-in-law stammered, her expression shifting from shock to terror and then to anger in a split second. Chris and the woman jumped to their feet as if on command, moving away from each other, but I had no mind to deal with them. My ears were ringing, my gaze fixed on the small, pitiful figure in the garden. "Jacob, Jacob, Mommy's home, Jacob," I screamed, running into the garden, and nearly falling on the steps, not feeling the pain, stumbling but getting up to run to my son. Seeing me, Jacob started screaming in an inhuman voice, and crawled into the farthest corner of the doghouse, baring his teeth, growling, still clutching the bone in his hand, looking at me with the utmost distrust, and I felt as if my heart had been sliced into 1,000 pieces. For 5 years, I had been tormented by the guilt of leaving him. For 5 years, I had dreamed of him calling me Mom, and today, when I returned, my son didn't recognize me, was afraid of me, treated me like an enemy. The strange woman also came outside, crossing her arms, sizing me up from head to toe, and sneering, a smile full of mockery and triumph. "So, you're the sister-in-law. Our little treasure is sweet, isn't he? Doesn't eat much, easy to take care of." Treasure, that word was like a slap in the face. I turned around, my body no longer trembling with pain, but burning with fury, and looked at Chris, the man I once loved, the man I entrusted my son to. "Chris, what is the meaning of this? Why is my son in this condition?" Chris couldn't look me in the eye, averting my burning gaze to coldly throw a file of documents at me. "Good, you're here, sign these." The papers scattered at my feet. A divorce petition and a copy of a court order declaring me legally missing. It was all a farce. I had sacrificed 5 years for my country, and in their eyes, I was missing. Was all my sacrifice just to become the victim of such a cruel plot? Elizabeth, whom I should now just call that woman, regained her composure, holding the infant, lifting her chin, and saying with venom in her voice, "And what's wrong with it?" Declaring a woman who hasn't shown a sign of life for 5 years, no single call, no single text, missing. You've got some nerves showing your face here. She began to shower the baby in her arms with kisses. There's no room in this house for a jinx like your son. Ever since you left, that Jacob was constantly sick, wasting away. I went to a psychic and she told me that he was blocking our families. Good fortune, said he had to be treated like a dog to break the curse, and then the household would prosper. Luckily, our little treasure, Monica, showed up and brought us a blessing. I couldn't believe my ears. Were these the words of a grandmother? Could they even come from a human being? I had thought she was just demanding and grumpy, but never imagined she was this evil and superstitious. I was wrong to leave my son with such a family. Wrong to think they would understand my sacrifice. I looked at Chris, the husband who had sworn eternal love to me. He as silent, the silence of an accomplice. Are we living in the 21st century? How can a person, a grandmother no less, say such things? The pain in my chest quickly turned into an icy rage. I sacrificed 5 years of my youth, worked in dangerous conditions, risked my life. Was it so these people could abuse my son like an animal in my house, with my money? He must have thought my long silence was fear, clearing his throat and putting on his usual cold demeanor, pointing a finger at the papers on the floor. This works out perfectly. Sign them. His voice was alien, devoid of the warmth of the husband I had loved. He already filed for a unilateral divorce. You've been declared legally missing. This house, the company, everything is mine now. Take a few bucks and get out. Get out. I repeated the words, which burned my tongue. He was kicking me out of my own house, the house my parents had given me as a wedding gift. I remembered years ago in this very living room, Chris holding my hand, saying in a shy but sincere voice, "Sophia, don't worry. Just go. I know you're worried about the company, but I'll just be the acting CEO, and take care of everything. I'll protect your parents' assets with my life." But the man standing before me was no longer the same person, heavier, dressed in designer clothes, his gaze cloudy and calculating. I bent down and picked up the divorce papers, and when I saw his signature, I burst out laughing, at first a quiet chuckle, then growing louder. "Auntie, am I cold?" Mocking laughter filled the entire living room, them staring at me like I was insane. I lifted my head, tears already dried. "Chris, have you lost your mind over these 5 years?" I looked him straight in the eye, the same eyes that once captivated me. His house and 51% of the shares in Sterling Homes Corp. are all assets I inherited from my parents. All the documents were prepared with our family lawyer, Mr. Miller, and as a witness, you were just the son-in-law, who married into the family. I granted you power of attorney to manage things. By what right do you think you can throw me out of here? The faces of Chris and Elizabeth turned pale, he stammering, What are you talking about? The power of attorney agreement expired long ago. I cut him off. That's right, but I'm back, and the owner in all the original documents is still me, Sophia Adams. As her son fell silent, Elizabeth started shrieking in a high-pitched voice, clutching the infant tightly. "You're lying. My son is the CEO. My son worked hard to grow this company, and now he has a son to take over after him. This treasure, my treasure. You and that jinx of yours, get out of here right now. A son to take over." I smiled, a smile that made Chris take a step back, boring my eyes into him. "Did you forget, Chris? 6 years ago, just before I left, we had comprehensive checkups at the clinic." I deliberately paused, watching the blood drain from his face. I remember that day perfectly. Remember the look on Chris' face when he got the results and broke down. I hugged him then, and said, "It's okay, a child is a gift from heaven." "Your results," I said slowly, emphasizing each word. How does zoospermia? "Your chances of conceiving were close to 0. The doctor said if we wanted a child, we could only hope for a miracle." I shifted my gaze from the infant in my mother-in-law's arms to the pale as a-sheet woman named Monica. During the 5 years of my absence, a miracle happened surprisingly quickly. "Are you sure that child is yours?" A deathly silence fell over the room, the only sounds the infant's cries and the scratching at the glass doors from the garden. It was my son, Jacob, the pathetic sound of his nails. The infant's wails broke the suffocating silence, Chris standing like a statue, his face going from white to ashen, Elizabeth speechless, Monica trembling like a leaf, but I was no longer in the mood to watch their pathetic soap opera, the sound of Jacob scratching breaking my heart. My son was what mattered most. I turned away from the trio and ran into the garden, Jacob seeing me get scared again, growling and crawling back into the doghouse. Honey, it's Mommy, I'm your mom, don't be afraid, I said in a trembling voice, reaching out my hand, but the child only grew more fearful. Seeing the chain on my son's neck, I felt another surge of rage. Where's the key? I shouted towards the house. Give me the key. Perhaps shocked by what I had just revealed, or terrified by my expression, the woman named Monica hastily found a bunch of keys and threw them in my direction. He bites. Please be careful. I looked at her with contempt, hurriedly inserting the key into the rusty padlock. With a click, the chain fell to the ground, and I quickly took off my designer blazer, just bought at the airport duty-free shop, to wrap around my son's naked, filthy body. Jacob was as light as a feather, the 6-year-old in my arms as light as a bundle of dry twigs, kicking weakly and trying to scratch me, but I held him tight, carrying him to the car and running out the gate, ignoring Elizabeth's screams behind me. Here are you taking that, Jinx? I drove like a mad woman, running several red lights towards the largest international hospital in the city. No time to worry about money. I had to save my son. I ran into the emergency room with Jacob in my arms, screaming, Doctor, please save my son, I'm begging you. Nurses and doctors immediately rushed over, horrified by Jacob's condition, quickly moving him to a private room. I collapsed onto a bench in the hallway, my hands still shaking, able to smell the filth and urine from Jacob on me, but I didn't care. Hours passed like centuries, and finally, an older doctor, who looked like the department head, came out, his kind face contorted with anger, looking at me then at the patient chart in his hand. Are you Jacob's mother? I quickly stood up and nodded, bursting into tears again. Is my son going to be okay, doctor? The older doctor sighed and led me to his office. Please sit down. You need to be strong. He pushed a stack of test results toward me. Your son is 6 years old and weighs 22 lb. That's third-degree malnutrition, a life-threatening condition. 22 lb. That's how much a 2-year-old weighs. My ears were ringing, but the doctor continued, his voice growing more serious. His larynx is severely damaged, not from illness, but from long-term imitation of sounds, like a dog's bark. His limb joints, especially the knees and wrists, show signs of slight deformities. Do you know what that means? The child has been moving on all fours for a long time instead of walking. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from sobbing, the older doctor pausing to bring me a glass of water, then pointing to an X-ray image. These scars, do you see these small circular marks? There. Burns, cigarette burns, with countless layers of old and new wounds here. The glass of water slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I remembered that Chris smoked, Elizabeth sometimes smoked too. Did they put out cigarettes on my son's body? Even the hands of the old doctor, who had seen countless patients, were now trembling with anger, taking off his thick glasses and rubbing his eyes. Mrs. Adams, I've been in this profession for 40 years. I'll be direct with you. This isn't just malnutrition, this is abuse, this is a crime. He lightly slammed his fist on the desk. You must report this to the police immediately, right now. This medical file is irrefutable evidence. We have to save this child, not just physically, but mentally. Report to the police. That would be a normal person's first reaction, but I had worked in harsh conditions for 5 years and had learned to keep a cool head. My heart was screaming in pain, but my mind told me it wasn't time yet. Chris and Elizabeth had been living off my money for the past 5 years, taken over my company. If I went to the police now without any preparation, they would hide the assets, use my money to hire the best lawyers, who could turn black into white, shift all the blame onto an irresponsible mother, who abandoned her home for 5 years, and I, who had just returned with nothing, would lose everything, even justice for my son. Thank you, doctor, I said, taking a deep breath to calm my shaking, pulling out my phone. Can I photograph this entire medical file? From a legal standpoint, the hospital is obligated to maintain patient confidentiality, correct? The old doctor looked at me, with surprise, probably thinking I was a heartless mother to remain so terrifyingly calm, but nodded. Yes, that's correct, but you're not going to report it. I will, I said firmly, but on my terms, when I'm sure I can win. I carefully photographed every page of the results, every X-ray, saving them in a secure folder. I'd like to move my son to a VIP room with 24-hour specialized care and hire 2 professional bodyguards. Does the hospital offer such services, or can you recommend someone? I couldn't leave Jacob alone. Didn't trust anyone. If Chris and Elizabeth realized Jacob was living proof against them, there was no telling what they might do, and I didn't want to think about it. The doctor looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, please rest assured, I'll take care of it immediately. I left the doctor's office to find Jacob, washed and changed, sleeping deeply in a white hospital bed, likely under sedation. I went out into the hallway and dialed a number I had known by heart for 5 years but had never dared to call, the other end picking up almost immediately. Hello, Mr. Miller. My voice was steady. A few seconds of silence on the other end, then a sharp breath of surprise. Sophia Adams. My God, you're alive. Where are you? Mr. Miller was my father's best friend and most trusted lawyer, whom I had entrusted with my affairs before I left. I don't have time. Please come to Metropolitan General Hospital immediately. Bring all the original documents concerning my parents' estate, everything. And Mr. Miller, I hesitated. We need to freeze Christopher Evans' assets immediately. Without waiting for Mr. Miller's response, I hung up, returning to my son's room where 2 burly men in security uniforms stood on either side of the door. I had paid for the best 24-hour protection. I went inside and sat next to my son's bed, gently touching his thin hand full of IV marks. Jacob, I whispered, tears finally coming. Mommy's sorry. Mommy was so late. But I swear I will get everything back. They will pay for your suffering 100,000 times over. Just half an hour later, a silver-haired elderly lawyer, my father's most trusted friend, Mr. Miller, arrived, practically running into the room, looking at me then at the sleeping child in the bed, his old eyes reddening and welling up with tears. My God, Sophia, you're really back. He looked at Jacob and said in a trembling voice, what did they do to this child? I'll explain everything later, I said firmly. But right now, we have to go. I need to reclaim what is mine immediately. I threw a thin blazer over my shoulders. Please leave one of your people here. In addition to these 2 guards, I'd like someone from your office to be here. Mr. Miller nodded and quickly made a call, and we returned to the mansion. This time I didn't enter as a missing wife who had returned, but as the owner of this house. Chris, Elizabeth, and Monica were still sitting in the living room, looking as if they had just had a heated argument. Chris looked stunned. Monica's eyes were swollen from crying. Elizabeth had a murderous expression on her face. At the sight of me, her posture immediately changed, no longer as aggressive as she had been in the morning, running up to try to grab my hand, but I took a step back with a cold stare. Sophia, darling, I'm sorry. She started her act, shedding crocodile tears. This old woman doesn't know what she's doing anymore. I didn't know you were coming back. It was this Monica who talked me into it. I didn't mean to say that. I thought it was some stranger. And Jacob, he was so disobedient. I just wanted to discipline him a little. I love him so much. You disciplined him with a chain and cigarettes, I said, sickened by her audacity. I had put up with her for years, but not today. Mrs. Evans, Mr. Miller said, with the authority of an experienced lawyer, placing a heavy leather briefcase on the table with a loud thud. We are not here to watch your tears. I didn't say a word, silently taking out my phone, no longer having the strength for arguments, and pressing the play button. The phone screen lit up, clearly showing the recording I had secretly made that morning right after entering the house, Elizabeth's shrill voice ringing out flawlessly. Add up, you monster. I went to a psychic and she told me that Brad is blocking Chris' path. He needs to be broken, treated like a dog, and then the household will prosper. A deathly silence fell in the room, Elizabeth's crying stopping, Chris closing his eyes, out of shame or regret, Monica burying her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Elizabeth's act was brutally cut short, her at a loss for words, no longer pretending, and when a person is cornered, their true nature comes out, her fear turning to rage, starting to scream, a true shriek that tore through the space. Yes, it was me. So what? She pointed a finger straight at my face, her eyes bloodshot. It's all because of you, because of that jinx. If it weren't for him, our house wouldn't be so unhappy. The psychic wasn't wrong one bit. I looked at her, a woman steeped in superstition and ignorance, no longer feeling anger but only a deep, bone-chilling disgust. and she continued to scream, "Look, ever since Monica came and our treasure was born, Chris' business has been doing so well. He is the treasure, my real grandson. You and that jinx of yours should have died long ago." Died. I repeated the word, my voice as cold as ice. "Did you just say, died?" Mr. Miller cleared his throat quietly. Elizabeth Evans, what you have just said, along with this recording, is more than enough to charge you with child abuse and incitement to commit a crime. Mr. Miller turned to Monica. "You will be charged with failure to report a crime and complicity." Monica was trembling like a leaf, not a drop of blood in her face. Chris slumped onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands, Elizabeth probably realizing what she had said, starting to stammer. I didn't mean that." Her screaming subsided, only heavy breathing remaining, a heavy silence falling in the room, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. A memento from my father, now seeming to count down the time these people had left. Chris sat huddled on the sofa, no longer looking at me. The woman named Monica cowed, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. Mr. Miller opened his briefcase with a stony face, taking out a carefully bound file of documents. "Mr. Christopher Evans," his voice calm but steely. "His is the deed to this mansion, and proof of ownership of 51% of the shares in Sterling Homes Corp. Everything is registered to the sole owner, Mrs. Sophia Adams. Your management agreement on her behalf lost its legal force the moment Mrs. Adams returned." Mr. Miller pushed the documents toward Chris. "At Mrs. Adams' request, you have 24 hours to hand over all company seals, accounting books, and vacate this house. Otherwise, legal action will be taken against you on charges of embezzlement and financial malpractice." Chris jerked his head up, the fear of his son's case being exposed and shame of his mother's crime vanishing, only greed remaining in his eyes. He wasn't interested in his 6-year-old abused son, didn't care that his mother had just confessed to a crime, only interested in money. Bursting out laughing, a harsh, crazed laugh. "Leave, hand over. You think it's that simple?" He jumped to his feet, looking at me with bloodshot eyes, and at that moment, I knew the husband I had loved was truly dead. This was a demon possessed by greed. "Sophia," he snarled, "you think just because you're back, it's all over. For the last 5 years, I've been growing this company myself. You think you can just take it from me so easily?" He looked around the room as if searching for something, his gaze landing on my neck. Instinctively, I raised my hand to cover my necklace, a small key to a safe, a keepsake from my mother. "If," he said in a calculated voice. "Why?" "Oh, give me the key to the safe in the bedroom. I know what your father left in it. Give it to me. We'll split it 50-50ths and I'll leave." I looked at him with the utmost disgust. "To think I once loved this man. You must be dreaming." Chris gritted his teeth. "I'm not kidding, Sophia. You think I'm scared of you and your old lawyer." He hadn't finished speaking when Monica, who had been sitting quietly, secretly took out her phone, quickly dialing a number and whispering into the receiver. "Rick, get here quick. It's urgent." Monica's whisper did not escape my notice, Mr. Miller frowning, and I knew further conversation was pointless. "Mr. Miller," I said quietly, "please call 911, immediately." Mr. Miller understood and quietly backed towards the door, pretending to look through documents, taking out his phone. Elizabeth, having recovered from her shock, regained her old malice, thinking her son had the upper hand, starting to chime in. "Why? That safe belongs to our Chris. You're just a daughter-in-law. You have no right to anything. You have to leave it for my son and grandson." "Grandson?" I scoffed. "Do you still believe he's your grandson? Or are you just fooling yourself, knowing full well whose child it is?" "You," she stammered, trembling with rage. At that moment, the mansion's doors burst open with a bang. A man with a scar on his face, covered in tattoos, entering. Before 2 burly thugs could follow, the man with the scar looked at Monica, then at Chris, and smiled leerously. "Brother-in-law, what's up?" Sounded urgent. "Brother-in-law?" I froze. This gangster was Monica's brother. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. A systematically planned trap. Chris, in collusion with a family of crooks, had tried to take over my assets and abused my son. Chris, now with strong support, showed no more fear, pointing at me and ordering, "Rick, take care of this woman. Get the key from her neck quick." The man with the scar, Rick, laughed, taking a shiny knife from his pocket, and starting towards me. "Missy, you've been abroad for 5 years, you probably don't know the rules around here. If you hand over the key nicely, I'll spare you, and if not, he ran his tongue over the blade, a disgusting gesture. Mr. Miller quickly stood in front of me. What are you doing? This is a clear case of breaking and entering and assault. I've called the police. The police. Rick sneered. By the time the cops get here, this old man will be dead. He shoved Mr. Miller hard, the elderly lawyer staggering and hitting a glass display case, the sound of shattering glass filling the air. Mr. Miller. I screamed. Worry about yourself, Rick said, running up and holding the knife to my throat. 1. You give me the key. 2. I'll mess up that pretty face of yours. The air became heavy, the stench of sweat and cheap alcohol from Rick hitting my nostrils, a cold shiver running down my spine. The blade of Rick's knife was just inches from my neck. I could feel his foul breath on my face. Well, little lady, choose. Mr. Miller staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his hand, cut by the glass. Stop, if you don't stop, you'll pay dearly for this. Dearly, Chris sneered, sitting on the sofa with one leg crossed over the other, the very sofa I had chosen myself. Old man, worry about your own life. Sophia, I'm telling you for the last time, the key. I looked at him, the man I had loved with all my heart, now ordering a thug to kill me, and suddenly, the fear in me vanished, replaced by a rage I had never felt before. I thought of Jacob, my 6-year-old son lying in the hospital covered in cigarette burns. I thought of my 5 hours of sacrifice, of my parents. No, I couldn't die here, wouldn't let them win. I glanced at Rick, who was drunk with the power the knife gave him, not noticing the garden spade standing next to the entrance door through which I had just come, an old spade. My mother used to weed the roses, a memento. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Okay, I'll give it to you. I pretended to tremble and reached for my neck as if to take off the necklace, Rick relaxing his guard slightly and smiling mockingly. Now that's a good girl. The moment he was least vigilant, I didn't take off the necklace. Instead, I pushed his hand away with all my might, the knife grazing my arm, tearing my clothes and causing a burning pain. At the same time, I turned and grabbed the spade leaning against the wall. Everything happened in a second. Anger, pain, love for my son, all focusing in my arm. I was no longer the weak Sophia, I was a mother. With all the strength suppressed for 5 years, I swung the spade and hit Rick in the back. Thwack! A dry, horrifying sound like a bone breaking echoed, Rick's eyes widening, the knife falling from his hand and clattering onto the marble floor, him collapsing to the ground without a single cry, unconscious. A deadly silence fell in the room. Chris, Elizabeth, Monica, and the 2 remaining thugs in shock. They couldn't believe the woman they thought was weak and helpless was capable of something so terrible. I was breathing heavily, still clutching the spade handle, blood seeping from the wound on my arm, staining one side of my clothes red. The terrifying silence lasted for a few seconds. Rick, K.'s 2 thugs snapping out of their shock. Boss. They snarled. Kill this bitch. They pulled out batons hidden under their clothes and rushed at me, but Chris was faster, not lunging at me, but looking at the necklace on my neck. The only thing that still interested him was that key. When Rick fell, fear gave way to a crazed greed. He lunged at me not to hit me, but to take it. Give it to me, he shouted, choking me. I tried to swing the spade, but it was too late. He was stronger than me, throwing me to the floor and reaching for my neckline with his other hand. I couldn't breathe, his nails digging into my skin. Chris, Mr. Miller ran to pull him off, but Elizabeth and Monica stopped him. Leave him be. Let him get the key first, son. She screamed as if cheering him on. Chris tore the necklace off with all his might, the gold chain scraping my skin, leaving a burning pain. He had the necklace in his hand, bursting out laughing, a barbaric, triumphant laugh. Oh, I got it, it's mine, everything is mine. He raised his hand in a gesture of triumph, not even looking at me coughing on the floor, not caring about the 2 thugs running toward me. At the moment of his greatest triumph, as he admired his prize, bam, the mansion doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't thugs. Rees, police. Loud sirens wailed from outside, several uniformed police officers with tasers in hand rushing in. They had arrived, Mr. Miller had called them. The room froze again, the 2 thugs stopping with their batons raised in the air, Elizabeth and Monica's faces bloodless, the red and blue lights of the police cars streaming in, flickering on Chris' pale face. He stood like a statue, his arm still raised in the air with my necklace in his hand, his barbaric, triumphant face from a moment ago now contorted with terror. Elizabeth and Monica trembled like shadows against the wall. Everybody hands up and get on the ground, one of the officers shouted. the two thugs immediately raising their hands, their batons falling to the floor, Rick still unconscious. Mr. Miller quickly pointed to me. "Officer, this lady is injured." Then he pointed to Chris. ND that man, Christopher Evans, just assaulted Mrs. Sophia Adams, and stole her property. The police quickly subdued the two thugs and handcuffed them, one checking on Rick and calling for medical assistance over the radio. Chris was ordered to hand over the necklace, letting it go with a trembling hand, the necklace falling to the floor with a soft clink that sounded deafeningly loud in the silence. Moments later, he too was handcuffed, the charges of assault and obstructing justice obvious. With M.R. Miller's help, I got up, my arm throbbing with pain, my neck stinging, coughing heavily to catch my breath. I looked at Chris, at the terror and shock in his eyes. "Officer," I said in a choked voice, "that man, Christopher Evans, didn't just steal a necklace. He and his family conspired to take over my entire estate." I looked at Chris again. "You wanted this key so badly. What did you think was inside? Gold bars, property deeds?" I turned to the officer. "In the presence of the law, I demand that this safe be opened immediately. This man just attacked me because of this safe." Chris and Elizabeth were in shock. They probably didn't expect me to suggest opening the safe myself. The officer who seemed to be in charge looked at me, then at Chris, and nodded. We were escorted to the bedroom, the room I had once decorated myself. Handcuffed, Chris walked trembling at the front, Elizabeth and Monica, with blood's faces, following him. The safe was hidden behind an oil painting. "Open it," one of the officers ordered, and with his cuffed hands, Chris clumsily inserted the key he had just stolen from me into the lock. With a click, the heavy safe door swung open. Elizabeth and Monica held their breath, trying to peek inside with a glint in their eyes. But inside, there was no gold, no jewels, no cash, only an old file of documents and an old cassette recorder. Elizabeth was devastated. "That's it." I walked over and picked up the cassette recorder, which was covered in a thin layer of 5-year-old dust, turning to Mr. Miller. "Do you remember this?" Mr. Miller nodded with a complicated expression. 6 years ago, when I decided to entrust everything to Chris, my father was uneasy, and in Mr. Miller's presence, he made Chris record his promise on tape. I thought my father was overreacting at the time, but now I pressed the play button. The hiss of the tape came from the speaker. Then Chris' familiar yet sincere and slightly shy voice from 6 years ago filled the room. "Afia, don't worry. Have a good trip. I know you're worried about your parents' company, but I promise you this house and the 51% share in the company, I'll just manage it in your name, protect your parents' assets with my life, never touch it, just take care of it until you get back." The recording ended, and the dry click of the tape recorder stopping echoed in the silence. A deathly quiet fell over the room, Chris standing with his mouth open, his face no longer pale but gray, looking at me then at the tape recorder. All his arrogance, all his greed, all his calculation, it all crumbled. He was condemned by his own oath from 6 years ago, his knees buckling as he sank to the floor. Elizabeth's eyes widened. "No, that's impossible. You tricked me. You set a trap for my son." The police captain picked up the file of documents lying next to it. They were the original deeds and the power of attorney agreement, all in my name. Looking at Chris, then at me. "Mrs. Sophia Adams, and all of you here, you need to come with us to the station." That night, I didn't sleep a wink. The cold fluorescent lights illuminated the corridor of the police station, the air smelling of must, old paper, and fear. I sat on a wooden bench, my arm bandaged but the wound, though not deep, still throbbing. Mr. Miller sat next to me, constantly making calls and arranging everything. Chris, Elizabeth, and Monica were separated into different interrogation rooms, the two thugs and Rick, who had regained consciousness, also detained. The stuffy time passed, and I thought of my son, Jacob, who was alone in the hospital. I had strictly instructed the security team not to allow anyone except me and Mr. Miller to see him. My heart was breaking, but I knew I had to see this through, to the end. Only and the guilty were punished would we be truly safe. At dawn, a female detective with a gentle face, but very sharp eyes came to me. "Sophia Adams, good morning. I'm Detective Maria Sanchez. I'll be handling your case. We need to go to the interrogation room now to give an official statement." I took a deep breath and entered the room, telling her everything from the moment I entered the mansion, the sight of my son chained up, Elizabeth's words, the divorce papers to the assault by Chris and the thugs. I tried to remain calm and recount everything clearly without omitting any details. Detective Sanchez listened attentively, taking notes non-stop, and when I finished, she looked at me. Her eyes no longer held just sympathy, but a deep understanding as a woman. What you've described is truly unbelievable, and I don't say that lightly. That's not all, I said in a choked voice, placing my phone on the desk. This is the recording I made this morning. It contains Elizabeth Evans' confession to her superstitious practices and calling my son a jinx to break a curse. Then I pushed the tape recorder forward. This is the cassette from the safe. It contains Christopher Evans' admission that he was only the manager of the estate, which proves his fraud and embezzlement. Finally, with a trembling hand, I took the photos of Jacob's medical file from my bag, and these are my son's medical results. 6 years old, 22 pounds, countless cigarette burns. Detective Sanchez took the results, and I saw her hands clench into fists as she read them, her gentle face hardening. They are no longer human. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with determination. Please don't worry. We will see this case through to the end, clarify every single detail. At that moment, Mr. Miller entered, accompanied by a higher-ranking officer. Detective, we've come to file an official criminal complaint, Mr. Miller said politely, placing a thick file of documents on the desk on behalf of Mrs. Sophia Adams. We are charging Mr. Christopher Evans with embezzlement of property of great value and causing grievous bodily harm. We charge Mrs. Elizabeth Evans and Monica Walker with child abuse with particular cruelty and causing grievous bodily harm, and Richard Walker and his accomplices with breaking and entering, robbery, and unlawful imprisonment. Each charge sounded clear and firm, and I knew this was just the beginning, but it was the first step to getting justice for my son. The police captain nodded. See. Complaint received. The suspects have been detained. We will immediately begin questioning neighbors and witnesses to strengthen the evidence. I didn't leave the station. Mr. Miller insisted I rest at a hotel, but I couldn't. I sat in the waiting area drinking one cup of bitter tea after another. I had to be there, needed to know the results immediately. Tired of the helplessness I had felt for 5 years being away from my son, now needing to be in control of every piece of information. Around noon, police officers, who had gone to collect statements from the neighbors, returned, looking tired and angry. I saw them quickly report to the lead investigator on my case, Captain Davis, and tried to eavesdrop but only heard snippets. A moment later, Captain Davis called me into his office. Sophia, please have some water. He just collected preliminary statements from the neighbors. He showed me a file of transcripts, and with a trembling hand, I flipped through the pages. The first statement was from a neighbor across the street. I remembered her as a nice person. Oh, officer, what happened? You're asking about the Evans family. The neighbor immediately lowered her voice. Oh, that CEO. He's been doing very well for himself lately. I heard their son is the president of a big company, always driving fancy cars. The officer asked if there was a young grandson in the house, about 6 years old, and the neighbor immediately grimaced and shook her head. Oh, there is, but that poor child, officer. She pulled the officer closer and whispered, I heard he's a bit not right in the head or possessed. His grandmother said he's a jinx, that a devil entered him and he bites people, so they have to keep him tied up. I got scared and haven't been over there since. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Not right in the head, possessed. Not only did they abuse my son, but they spread rumors to make him a monster in the eyes of the neighbors, to justify their crimes, cutting him off from any outside help. I turned the next page to a statement from the next door neighbor. I saw it often. I saw the child chained up outside in the rain, in the heat, skinny as a skeleton, naked once. I couldn't believe my eyes. Saw him digging in the dirt under a tree and eating the dirt. Why didn't you report it? The officer asked, and the neighbor sighed. How could I report it? It's a family matter. The grandmother said he was crazy, that he bit her arm until it bled. Who would dare to go near? We were scared, too. Thought they were keeping a dangerous dog, not their own grandson. A dangerous dog? They had succeeded. In Evrion's eyes, they had turned my son into a dangerous dog. The last statement was from a young woman, renting an apartment nearby. I often come home late from work, and at night, I swear I heard screams, the sound of beatings, and this whimpering, such a pathetic whimper. I thought it was the new German Shepherd they bought. To think that was the child's voice. My God, how can a person be so cruel? I buried my head in my hands on the desk, unable to cry anymore. The tears had dried up, leaving only pain and a bone-deep hatred. They had made a beast out of my son, not just in the house, but in the eyes of the entire neighborhood. Captain Davis placed a hand on my shoulder, a professional gesture of comfort. The neighbors' statements have given the investigation momentum, confirming that the abuse was open and long-term. But his voice became more serious. We need more direct evidence of who physically abused him. Elizabeth and Christopher Evans are blaming each other and Monica Walker, and we are now looking for one person who may be a key witness, a former housekeeper, a Miss Helen, who was fired about 2 years ago. It took the entire afternoon to find the former housekeeper, Miss Helen. Her registered address was out of date, but the police finally found her through acquaintances. Miss Helen was no longer working as a housekeeper. The previous job had likely been too traumatic for her, and was working as a kitchen helper in a small restaurant in a distant neighborhood, miles from the mansion. When the police found her, she was terrified, and only after long assurances that she was safe, did she agree to come to the station. I asked to observe the interrogation from behind a one-way mirror. I had to know everything, and Captain Davis agreed. Miss Helen entered the room, thinner and paler than I remembered, sitting down and wringing her trembling hands. When Captain Davis asked about her former job at the Evans house, she flinched. When he asked, "Do you know Mrs. Sophia's son, Jacob?" Miss Helen suddenly burst into tears, sobbing, not the fake crying of Elizabeth, but a suppressed sob full of fear and guilt. I am to blame. I have failed Mrs. Sophia, failed the young master. My heart pounded. Miss Helen, what did she know? Between tears, Miss Helen began her stuttering account. I was hired about a year after Mrs. Sophia left. Back then young Master Jacob was still a normal, charming child, a bit quiet, but still. But Mrs. Elizabeth wouldn't let anyone near him, said he was frail. Everything, Miss Helen sobbed. Everything changed when that Monica moved in. Mrs. Elizabeth came back from some psychic and said Master Jacob was a jinx. Then she started locking him in the utility closet and giving him scraps of food. Sometimes I saw her throw food on the floor and make him eat it on all fours. With the dog, I had to bite my hand hard to keep from screaming from behind the mirror. And what did you do about it? Captain Davis asked, his voice also choked, and Miss Helen cried, her face contorted with pain. I was scared. I was just an employee, needed the job. But I couldn't stand it. The young master was so hungry, just skin and bones. Once I couldn't take it anymore, and secretly brought him a steamed bun in the closet. And what happened? That woman found out. Miss Helen trembled like a leaf, as if reliving something terrible. She slapped me so hard my ears rang, said I was feeding the jinx and ruining the psychics. Curse breaking. And Mrs. Elizabeth dragged me outside and called me all sorts of names, fired me on the spot. Was that all? Captain Davis asked, and Miss Helen shook her head, her eyes filled with extreme fear. Before I left, Mrs. Elizabeth pointed at me and said, if you breathe a word of this, my brother, that Rick with the scar, will take care of you. I was so scared. She paused, looked at the officer, and as if gathering her last bit of courage, added, and right in front of me, she said to Monica. Miss Helen's voice was like a ghost's whisper. She said, a jinx like that just needs to be beaten to death. When he dies, the house will prosper. Officer, I'm not lying. She wanted to kill the young master. I was scared and couldn't say anything. I shot to my feet from behind the mirror. Beaten to death, those words hit me like a hammer. This was no longer abuse because of superstition. This was a conscious attempt at murder. Captain Davis came out of the room, his face cold and hard as steel, looking at me. Sophia, the nature of this case has changed. Miss Helen's testimony, hearing Elizabeth's order to beat him to death, hurt me more than Rick's knife blade. The case was no longer about abuse. It had escalated to a deliberate crime, and both I and Captain Davis knew it. He immediately assembled his team. We need an urgent search warrant. The witness testimony and the child's medical records are sufficient grounds. We need to find the murder weapons and any evidence of systematic abuse. I jumped up. I have to go with you. Mr. Miller hastily tried to stop me. Sophia, no, going back there will cause you too much pain. You don't need to see that hell again. I have to, I said firmly, pushing his hand away. My son lived there for 5 years. I'm only going back for a few hours. I have to see it with my own eyes, gather the evidence myself. I owe it to my son. Captain Davis looked at me with respect and nodded. We returned to the mansion, but this time it wasn't just me and Mr. Miller, but an entire forensic team. The house was still luxurious, now surrounded by yellow police tape that read, "Crime scene, do not cross." The officers spread out. One group searched Chris and Elizabeth's rooms, another, led by Captain Davis himself, went straight to the backyard. I followed him, feeling my legs turn to lead, looking at the filthy doghouse. The stench of must, filth, and urine hit my nostrils, and I thought, or the past 5 years, my son breathed this air. Dig here. Captain Davis pointed to the damp earth right next to the doghouse where the German Shepherd always lay, and 2 young officers began to dig. As the earth was turned, one of them stopped. "Captain, there's something here." He carefully brushed away the last layer of soil, revealing a black object wrapped in an old plastic bag. He put on gloves and slowly pulled it out. It was a leather whip, the kind used to train wild animals, the tip frayed and covered in dried dark brown stains. I covered my mouth with my hand, remembering Chris had bought that whip, said it was to train the German Shepherd, had and Rick wear it at his belt. "We've got it," Captain Davis said in a steely voice, "bag it, and send it to the lab." But the hell wasn't over. The team searching the utility closet, where Miss Helen said Jacob was imprisoned, also found something. "Captain, this way." I ran after the voice. The closet was dark and damp, and in a corner behind some old tires, they found a small metal box, a rusty old cookie tin. When one of the officers pried it open with pliers, the lid popped off, revealing hundreds of cigarette butts packed so tightly they formed a thick layer. As were what had left the countless circular scars on my son's body. I thought I was prepared, but at the sight of that box, I almost fainted. And at the bottom of the box, among the butts, was something small, white, and hard. A young officer, probably a rookie, picked it out with a trembling hand, looking at it then at me, his eyes full of horror. "My God, Captain, it's a baby tooth." A baby tooth? My son's tooth. I collapsed to the ground, my mind going blank. My son, they had beaten him so hard they had knocked his teeth out. I don't remember how I left that mansion. The image of the metal box full of cigarette butts and a baby tooth haunted me, replaying in my mind like a horror movie. Mr. Miller supported me and put me in his car, and instead of taking me back to the station in my state of shock, he drove me to his office. "Sophia, calm down. You have to be strong. Absolutely all the evidence is in our hands now." Mr. Miller gave me hot tea with ginger, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold the cup. I sat in his luxurious office, looking out the large window at the city. 5 years ago, when I left, I thought I was entrusting my estate to a good husband, maybe not brilliant, but at least trustworthy. But Chris, he wasn't just incompetent. Mr. Miller. I lifted my head, the pain having turned into a cold determination, a will of steel. "I want to know about the money now." I knew the police were handling the criminal case, but the financial matters, the company, I had to reclaim myself, wanted to know what he had done with my father's company over the last 5 years. Mr. Miller nodded, his old face hardening. He had been expecting this. Right after leaving the station that morning, he had temporarily frozen Sterling Holmes' account and hired the best audit team from his law firm. I waited in silence, remembering how Chris rarely contacted me through the official company email, always said the company was doing well, that he was expanding the business. I was once proud of him. How ridiculous. Mr. Miller's phone rang. It was the head of the audit team, and Mr. Miller put it on speaker. "Counselor." A man's voice on the other end was very concerned. "The situation is very bad, much worse than we thought." My heart sank. "Go on." Surface level accounting books are perfectly clean, revenues were growing, profits too. But when we started digging deeper, it turned out to be all a sham. Christopher Evans has been systematically draining the company for the last 3 years. All the contracts were with Shellcom. Pennies he set up himself, and the money was siphoned off. "How much?" I asked, my voice dry. "We haven't tallied everything yet." "But Mrs. Adams," the accountant hesitated, "that's not the worst part. The worst part is that Sterling Holmes, your company, is now in massive debt." "A bank loan?" Mr. Miller asked. "No, counselor, not from a bank." The accountant's voice dropped. "It's a loan from loan sharks, a loan for $5 million. $5 million. My head spun. That amount could bankrupt the company. What did he do with the money? Looking into it, it seems he invested it in real estate, under the name of a woman named Monica, but the market froze, he lost everything, and now the debt plus interest is due. I felt a chill run down my spine. And who is the creditor? The accountant took a deep breath. According to the loan documents, the guarantor and representative of the lending company is a certain Richard Walker, alias Rick the Scar. I was in shock. All the pieces of the puzzle fit. Rick wasn't just Monica's brother, he was also the creditor. Chris took a loan from loan sharks, let a gangster, his mistress brother, live in my house, turned my son into a victim of superstition, put my company up as collateral for the debt. Now I understood why that Rick had shown up at my house so confidently. He wasn't just Monica's brother, but also the creditor who had Chris by the throat. And Chris, desperate after losing all the money, had brought him into the house, probably to pay off the debt or to hatch a new scheme together. That scheme was the safe. They thought there was something in it that turned their situation around, willing to use violence, even murder, to get it. I sat in Mr. Miller's office, stunned. The whole picture became clear. Terrifyingly corrupt and dark. Chris wasn't just an abusive husband, a terrible father, and a traitor. He was a professional con man, a reckless gambler who had brought ruin to our family and my entire estate. I thought of Elizabeth. She was happy her son was successful in business, didn't know that the success she saw was built on debt. The treasure she cuddled in her arms was probably also part of this game. Mr. Miller, I raised my head, the shock having passed, leaving only the cold determination of someone who has to fight. We need to do one more thing. Mr. Miller looked at me with concern. Tell me, I'm worried your heart can't take any more. It can, I said firmly. I want to request a DNA test. Mr. Miller understood immediately. Monica's child. Yes. I found a photo on my phone that I had taken 6 years ago, the only picture of Chris' medical file that I had kept. I have medical proof from 6 years ago. My husband, Christopher Evans, is practically sterile. The probability is close to 0. I thought my 5-year absence would give him time to reflect or for medical advancements, but I was wrong. My pain from 6 years ago has now become my sharp street weapon. I am certain that child is not Chris, I said clearly. Mr. Miller nodded. Theoretically, that's a matter of the private rights of the child and Monica, but it's connected. I cut him off, determination growing inside me. It's the motive, Elizabeth's main motive. She abused Jacob because she believed she had a real, legitimate grandson. They used that child as a treasure, as a justification to remove my son, the jinx. We must prove that this treasure was also a fraud. I have to destroy everything they built their actions on. Chris' facade as a successful man, Elizabeth's hypocrisy as a noble mother-in-law, and that woman's last hope. Mr. Miller stood up. I understand. I will file a motion with the law enforcement authorities. We will request a DNA test as part of the case to clarify the motive and confirm the relationship between the suspects. This is a fully justified request. We returned to the station, and Captain Davis, upon hearing our request and seeing Chris' old medical file, immediately agreed. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but the screams coming from Elizabeth's interrogation room could be heard all the way down the hall. They must have informed her of the decision. No, how dare you? How dare you question my legitimate grandson? He is my treasure, my golden grandson. I'll sue you for defamation. Chris, son, they want to hurt my grandson. Elizabeth's screams eventually died down. She probably ran out of strength, and the air in the station became tense and oppressive again. I sat in the waiting room fiddling with a now cold cup of tea, and with every passing moment, I grew more worried about Jacob, wanting to end all of this as quickly as possible and get back to my son. In the evening, Captain Davis came out of Monica's interrogation room, his face no longer as tense as before, showing a slight fatigue and satisfaction. Monica Walker has confessed, he said to me, and Mr. Miller, his voice quiet. My heart started beating faster. What did she say? Captain Davis led us to his office. Sophia, just as we expected, the request for a DNA test was the decisive blow. She panicked. From Captain Davis, brief explanation. I could imagine the scene in the interrogation room. Monica, realizing her talisman, her child, would be tested, broke down, crying and shifting all the blame onto Elizabeth and her brother Rick, claiming she was a victim herself, deceived by Chris. Captain Davis said, flipping through the file, according to Monica's testimony, Chris told her his wife had died abroad long ago, and that the formalities were taken care of, promising her marriage and status. Yes, I was deceived by Chris. He said Sophia was dead, that's why I agreed to live with him. The matter with Jacob was really Elizabeth's idea. She's so superstitious, said he had to be broken for the business to do well. I didn't know anything. A weak lie. Mr. Miller scoffed, living in that house, she couldn't have not known. Agreed, Captain Davis concurred. W. Hen asked about the violence, she adamantly denied it, said it was all Rick's doing. My brother has a violent temper, he was the one who hit the child. I tried to stop him but I couldn't. My brother is a terrible person, I was scared of him too. I laughed coldly, couldn't stop him, again, just like Chris, always looking for an excuse to justify their weakness or complicity. And the cigarette burns? I asked sharply. Hundreds of wounds, she couldn't stop that either. On the matter of the burns, Captain Davis shook his head. He denied it, said she knew nothing about it, that it was probably Elizabeth's idea. But her testimony confirmed that Elizabeth was the main instigator of the abuse against Jacob, and Richard Walker repeatedly engaged in direct violence. This provides sufficient grounds to charge all three. I clenched my fists. Finally, they were turning on each other, Elizabeth blaming Monica, Monica blaming Rick and Elizabeth, and Chris surely would say he knew nothing, that he was too busy. A pathological family. There's one more thing, Captain Davis said, looking at me with an apologetic expression regarding the child. I held my breath. She confessed, he said quietly, the child is not Christopher Evans. Even though I expected it, my heart sank. Then whose? According to her testimony, the child belongs to another man, a man who abandoned her before she met Chris. She deceived Chris into believing it was his child to force him into marriage and to get Elizabeth to accept her. I burst out laughing, a bitter laugh. So that's how it was, a soap opera, a fraud upon a fraud. Elizabeth worshipped a fake treasure, Chris was proud of a fake heir, and driven by a lie, they abused their own true blood, their real descendant. I had been waiting at the station for nearly 24 hours, my body feeling as heavy as lead, the wound on my arm having started to throb, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. In the evening, the lead investigator, Captain Davis, came out with a sealed envelope, looking at me with both fatigue and determination. Sophia, we have the DNA results. I didn't ask what they were, I already knew, only asking for one thing, can I see her reaction? I was led to an observation room behind a one-way mirror, where Elizabeth was sitting in the interrogation room, exhausted after many hours of questioning but still maintaining an arrogant demeanor, muttering curses under her breath, at me, at Monica, even at the psychic. Captain Davis entered and placed the results on the desk. Elizabeth Evans, do you remember the boy you called your treasure? Your legitimate grandson. Elizabeth immediately shot her head up like a hen protecting her chicks. So what? What else do you want to do to my grandson? Listen carefully, he is the one and only golden legitimate heir of the Evans family. You can't do anything to him. Captain Davis, with a stony face, pushed the documents towards her. These are the DNA test results for that boy, and your son Christopher Evans. Elizabeth squinted, she either didn't understand, or couldn't read the medical terminology. You're not kidding me. Talk, say he's his son. Captain Davis looked her straight in the eye and said in a clear, emphatic voice, see. Conclusion, no biological relationship was found between the boy and Mr. Christopher Evans. No biological relationship was found, every word struck like a hammer. Silence falling in the room, a heavy, sticky silence. Elizabeth's face contorted. No, she whispered, no, you faked this, you conspired with that Sophia to trick me. She snatched the documents, not understanding everything but seeing the conclusion printed in bold letters, no relationship found. The treasure she had worshipped, the reason she had abused my son, her pride, it was all fake. The grandson who was supposed to replace Jacob turned out to be someone else's child. She started to laugh, a terrifying high-pitched insane laugh. The treasure is not my grandson. The jinx, the treasure. Her laughter turned into a crazed scream. Give me back my grandson, give me back my treasure. This is Sophia's doing. She's the one who switched my grandson. She destroyed our family. She lunged at Captain Davis, scratching and screaming like a mad woman. Two female officers immediately rushed in to restrain her, but Elizabeth thrashed and bit like she was having a seizure. Suddenly, her eyes bulged. She went rigid and collapsed on the floor, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. I stood behind the mirror, watching the scene ensue. Lentz, the lady of the house, the noble mother-in-law, now lay on the cold floor, thrashing like a mad woman. I felt not a shred of sympathy, only a cold emptiness. To think the basis of all her crimes was a lie. The sounds of Elizabeth's screams and first aid being administered echoed down the hall, and she was taken to a psychiatric hospital under police supervision. Chris in the interrogation room next door must have heard everything, learned that his mother had lost her mind, that his son was a fake, that the loan shark's debt was real, and that the tape recording was real. He had nothing left. Just as I was about to leave to go back to Jacob, Mr. Miller approached me, his old face full of fatigue. Sophia, wait a moment, that Chris wants to see you. I don't want to see him. I turned my head away, too tired to even look at his face. No, he doesn't want to see you, Mr. Miller clarified. He wants to see your lawyer, wants a deal. I stopped. A deal? I snorted a dry laugh. He took over my company, racked up a $5 million debt, allowed my son to be abused to the point of having his teeth knocked out, choked me to steal a key, and now he wants a deal. He's in the room next door, Mr. Miller said quietly. He knows there's no way out. This is a gambler's last desperate move. I agreed, not to talk, but to see to what extent human audacity could reach. I entered a small room with Mr. Miller, where Chris was sitting with his hands cuffed to a chair, no longer the elegant CEO I had seen that morning, his hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot and full of desperation. When he saw me, he flinched. He probably wanted to talk only to the lawyer, not to me. So Sophia, he stammered, trying to smile, but it looked worse than crying. I said nothing, sitting down and crossing my arms, letting Mr. Miller handle it. Mr. Evans, Mr. Miller began. I hear you want a deal. Chris nodded hastily, speaking to Mr. Miller, but his eyes fixed on me, a pleading, begging look. Look, counselor, please tell Sophia, I made a mistake. It's all my fault. I was deceived by my mother, deceived by Monica. She tricked me into thinking she had a son. I'm a victim too. Again, the same cowardly refrain, shifting all the blame onto the women, his mother, his mistress. Get to the point, Mr. Miller interrupted impatiently, and Chris swallowed. Yes, I'll sign the divorce papers immediately. Give back the mansion, the company, everything. I won't take a single dollar. I almost burst out laughing. Give back. It was never his, but he hesitated. I knew this was the crux of it. There's one condition. Sophia has to drop the criminal charges, all the charges of abuse, robbery, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. Rick's debt? Those $5 million, Sophia has to take them on, as payment for my hard work managing the company for 5 years. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. He wasn't just asking me to forgive him, but to pay off his gambling debts racked up for another woman. And in return, Mr. Miller asked calmly, as if playing a game of chess. In return, Chris straightened up, as if trying to maintain his last shred of pride. I will remain silent in court about Sophia abandoning the house for 5 years without a word. I'll say it was for work, not that she ran off with some man. He still thought he could blackmail me, even in this situation. I slowly stood up. I had heard enough, walking to the desk, and looking straight into those desperate, vile eyes. Chris, I said, my voice very quiet but loud enough for him to hear clearly, I will not drop the charges. I will not pay a single penny of your debt. I leaned in and looked at him, like he was an insect. You want a deal? I said to Mr. Miller, but my gaze was still fixed on Chris. Please inform this gentleman that I want justice. I want this man, his mother, his mistress, and her gangster brother to all face the punishment they deserve, to sit in prison for as long as possible. When I left the station, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Dawn was breaking outside. Mr. Miller had handled the legal matters, and the arrest warrant had been issued. Their sentence was now in the hands of the court. My fight was just beginning, not at the police stadio, and anymore, but at the hospital. I ran to Metropolitan General Hospital, my heart pounding like crazy. I had been away from my son for almost a whole day, afraid he would wake up, not see me, and panic again. I opened the door to the VIP room, and the sight inside horrified me. The room was clean, but it looked like a hurricane had passed through it. Food was scattered on the floor, the bedding was torn, and Jacob was hiding under the bed. 2 nurses stood in a corner of the room, helpless with apologetic expressions. Mrs. Adams, we're so sorry, a young nurse said. He child woke up in the middle of the night looking for you, then he wouldn't let anyone near him. When we brought food, he threw it and scratched us. I looked at the red scratches on the nurse's arm, my heart sinking. No, thank you for your effort. I'll take it from here. I said quietly, please leave for a moment, and please don't let anyone but the doctor in. When the door closed, I peeked under the bed. In the darkness, I could only see two eyes shining with fear like a wild animal cornered, a low growl coming from there. My son was afraid of me. I didn't dare to cry, sitting on the cold floor far from the bed by the door, not trying to pull him out by force. Jacob, I whispered, my voice heavy with exhaustion. It's Mommy. Mommy's here. Mommy just went to catch some bad bugs, very bad bugs. I'm back now. I'm not going anywhere. I sat like that without moving, telling him stories of my 5 years away, of the white snow-capped mountains I had seen, of the hot deserts I had walked through. I told him about his grandparents, about this house, about the swing I had set up for him. The growling from under the bed gradually subsided, then stopped. I don't know how much time passed, an hour, maybe 2. I was so tired, resting my head on my knees and falling asleep. The following days were the longest of my life. Jacob wouldn't let anyone but me touch him. I washed him myself, fed him myself, but he still didn't speak, just looked at me with empty, vacant eyes. Doctors, rehabilitation therapists, and psychologists began to intervene. Sophia, the child's knee and wrist joints are damaged, a physical therapist said. It's the result of moving on all fours for too long. We have to teach him to walk again, to stand up straight. The first rehabilitation sessions were hell. My son couldn't walk. The 6-year-old's legs trembled weakly. He fell and fell, not crying out loud, only making sharp sounds, a mixture of anger and helplessness. I would hug him. It's okay. If you fall, Mommy will catch you. Mommy will always be here to catch you. Let's try again. The psychologist said, look, the child is still hiding food under his pillow. It's a fear of starvation, deeply rooted in his subconscious. Please don't scold him. Let him feel that food will no longer be scarce. I was patient, placing bread and milk around the room, eating with him, chewing, laughing, and saying, yummy, Jacob, try some. A week passed. Jacob gained 4 lb. His body began to fill out. He started walking around the room holding my hand. He still wasn't talking, but he started looking me in the eyes. One afternoon, I was feeding him porridge, so tired that I accidentally spilled some hot porridge on his clothes. Oh, I exclaimed, quickly wiping it with a towel, scared he would get frightened, start screaming, think he was being punished or burned, preparing to comfort him. But Jacob didn't scream. He flinched, looked at the stain on his clothes, then at me, and his dry lips moved, a rough, heavy sound coming from his throat. Dear Ty. I froze. Did I miss her? What did you say, sweetie? He looked at the stain and wrinkled his face in displeasure, pointing at it with his finger. Dirty. One word, one single word. Dirty. The tears I thought had long since dried up suddenly flowed. I didn't dare hug him, lest I scare him. Just nodding, crying and laughing like a mad woman. Yes, yes, son, dirty. The clothes are dirty. Mommy will wipe it. I'm wiping it. My son, you're so brave. It was one word, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. Jacob had started to communicate, even with simple sounds. He no longer growled, was still afraid, but was starting to stand up straight, his physical recovery progressing. But the psychologist said, it was just the tip of the iceberg. The real wound was deep. We need to understand how wounded his psyche is. Mrs. Hannah, a renowned child psychologist, told me, children, this age can't express their pain in words. They will show it through their behavior or their drawings. So we started art therapy. I sat in a corner of the room pretending to read a book, but my eyes never left my child. The office was sunny and warm, full of toys and crayons. At first, Jacob was very scared, cowering and refusing to touch anything. The light, for him, accustomed to a dark and damp closet, as terrifying. Mrs. Hannah was very patient, not forcing him, sitting on the floor and starting to color herself. She drew a flower, a sun. After a few sessions, Jacob started to show curiosity, crawling closer. Jacob, do you want to draw, too? Mrs. Hannah gently handed him a large piece of paper and a box of thick crayons. I held my breath. This was the moment my son held a crayon in his hand for the first time. Jacob looked at the box, blue, red, yellow, orange, a plethora of vibrant colors, but his small, thin hand hesitated and bypassed all those bright colors, picking out a black crayon. My heart sank. With a trembling hand, he started drawing clumsy lines, one stick figure, a pitifully small figure huddled in the corner of the huge white paper. Who is that? Mrs. Hannah asked, her voice as gentle as water. Jacob didn't answer, focused on his drawing, then drew another figure, a very large stick figure taking up almost the entire rest of the paper, a huge black shadow that stood over, oppressing that small dot, with its hands raised as if screaming. I knew it was Elizabeth, Chris, Monica, Rick. It was the entire terrifying world that was crushing my son. I thought that was it, but no. Jacob put down the black crayon, looked at the box of colors for a long time, then picked out a red crayon. My son stared at the small stick figure he had just drawn, representing himself, and started pressing down hard with the red crayon. He wasn't coloring, not drawing. He was stabbing the crayon into the paper again, and again. ... Jacob gritted his teeth and muttered, stabbing the figure's arms, legs, chest, stomach. Angry red circular marks littered the paper. "OT," he whispered, breathing heavily, his face pale and hot. "Hurts, hot." Mrs. Hannah turned to me, her face as white as a sheet. I knew what he was drawing. He was reenacting the cigarette burns. He stabbed harder, faster, with more fury. "Hot!" he screamed, the red crayon snapping in his small hand. He looked at the broken crayon, at the drawing full of red wounds, and for the first time since my return, after I don't know how many years, my son burst into tears, not a whimper, not a sharp scream, but a heart-wrenching sob. He lifted his face to the ceiling and wailed, 5 years of pain, 5 years of fear, 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of abuse, all erupting in that one moment. I couldn't take it anymore, ignoring the doctor's recommendations, and running over, hugging his trembling little body. "Mommy's here, Mommy's here, Jacob, Mommy's here." I cried, louder than he did. "No one will burn you anymore, no one will dare to hurt you. Mommy's here, Mommy's sorry, I'm so sorry, honey." Mrs. Hannah quietly left and closed the door, leaving us alone. For the entire afternoon, the only sound in the room was crying, his crying and my crying. For him, it was a release. For me, it was the poison that killed the last remnants of humanity I had for Chris' family. Since my son was fighting with every painful memory, there was no reason for me to give up. While I was in the hospital, learning to be a mother again, learning how to soothe a child tormented by nightmares, outside, Mr. Miller was handling the complicated financial affairs on my behalf. Chris' $5 million debt was real, and it was tightening a noose around the neck of Sterling Holmes, my parents' legacy. One morning, Mr. Miller called me, this time with a note of relief in his voice. "Sophia, we have allies." When the news of Chris' arrest and the company's debt to loan sharks spread, the other shareholders, who owned 49% of the shares, immediately took action. They were old friends of my father, experienced people in the industry, who had trusted him, believing in his connection to me, and Chris' promises. They called an emergency board meeting, Mr. Miller explained, and uncovered everything. "Sophia, these are not novices." They went through the accounting books with a fine-tooth comb. My father's old friends were furious that they had been deceived by an inexperienced son-in-law. They discovered not only the $5 million debt, but also that Chris had been forging your signatures and minutes of shareholders' meetings, setting up dozens of shell companies, and making fake contracts to siphon off millions. For the last 5 years, he thought that since my father was gone and I was far away, no one was watching him. He had underestimated my father's friends. They didn't just accuse him, Mr. Miller continued, they filed new charges against Chris for embezzlement and document forgery, handing over all the evidence of his malpractice and forgeries to the Economic Crimes Unit. Now his criminal record will be one file thicker. I hung up and looked out the hospital window. The sun was shining warmly, but my heart was as cold as ice. I had thought Chris was just abusive, weak, and superstitious, but no, he was an organized criminal, step by step planning to take everything from me. He called my son a jinx, but he was the one who brought misfortune to my life, to my parents' legacy. I used to suffer, thinking I had misjudged a man, but now I understood, I hadn't just misjudged a man, I had let a devil into my home. I tightly squeezed Jacob's hand, who had fallen asleep, exhausted after therapy. "Honey," I whispered, "it's almost over. Mommy will get everything back, not just justice for you, but also clear Grandpa's name." On the day of the trial, I dressed in a black elegant suit, leaving Jacob at the hospital with the psychologist and 2 trusted guards hired by Mr. Miller. I didn't want him to see those demonic faces again, had to go alone. I entered the courtroom, not as the poor wife Sophia, but as the plaintiff and legal representative of my 6-year-old son, Sophia Adams. The room was packed. My father's friends, shareholders, curious neighbors, and journalists. The case, combining a well-known businessman's embezzlement and child abuse, had shaken the entire city. I looked at them. In the dock sat Chris, Rick, and Monica, thin, pale, their appearance in prison uniforms pathetic. Chris couldn't look at me, keeping his head down, his hair disheveled. Monica was sobbing. Rick still glared at me with hatred. And then they brought her in. Elizabeth, since the day she had her psychotic break, had not been of sound mind. Today, on medication, she looked more lucid, but her gaze was empty, her lips still muttering something. The trial began. The prosecutor read out the indictment from fraud, embezzlement, and document forgery to assault, robbery, and finally child abuse, each charge and act clearly presented. Their defense lawyers tried to argue. They said Chris had been deceived, that Elizabeth was mentally unstable due to her superstitions, that Monica had been coerced. But the prosecutor began to present the evidence. When the forged financial statements and fake contracts appeared on the screen, Chris started trembling like a leaf. When the tape from the safe was played, and his voice promising to protect it with his life filled the room, a stir went through the courtroom. But that wasn't the climax. The climax came when the prosecutor said, "And this is the result of superstition and cruelty." On a large screen, they displayed the photos of Jacob from the hospital, 6 years old, 22 pounds, a naked, emaciated body, X-rays showing slight deformities of his knee and wrist joints. Then they enlarged the image, showing the numerous circular scars on my son's back, arms, and chest. Gasps came from the audience. My God. Crying could be heard, some people turning their heads, unable to look. I had to bite my lip until it bled to keep from collapsing. The prosecutor continued in a firm voice. Physical evidence secured at the crime scene, a leather whip with traces of the victim's blood, a metal box full of cigarette butts, and a baby tooth. And they played the recording I had made, Elizabeth's cold voice, that jinx. Then the recorded testimony of the housekeeper, Miss Helen, was played, her trembling voice, saying, "Beaten to death. When he dies, the house will prosper." That was the last straw. Elizabeth, who had been sitting and muttering, suddenly shot her head up, the words, "beaten to death," seeming to trigger a fit of rage in her. Lies. She jumped up and screamed, her shriek tearing through the solemnity of the court. "It's all her fault." She pointed a finger at me, her eyes bloodshot and insane. "She's the one who hurt me. She hurt my grandson. She's the jinx. She switched my treasure. Give me back my treasure. Give it back." She tried to climb over the dock, and the court bailiffs had to immediately restrain her, but Elizabeth thrashed and bit like she was having a seizure. Chris was screaming, "Mom, Mom, please stop." Monica just hung her head and sobbed. The courtroom descended into chaos. I sat motionless, watching this woman struggling and being led away, demanding the return of a non-existent treasure. I no longer felt hatred, just a boundless exhaustion. After Elizabeth's terrifying outburst, a 15-minute recess was called. She was moved to an isolation room, her screams still audible. Chris' lawyer moved for a mistrial, arguing that Elizabeth was insane, but the motion was denied. The evidence was too overwhelming, and her statements made while she was lucid had all been recorded. We didn't have to wait long. After deliberation, the panel of judges returned to the courtroom, the air heavy. I held my breath, Mr. Miller gently placing a hand on my shoulder. The presiding judge was a man with a stern face, beginning to read the verdict, his voice emotionless but clear. Rereading all the charges, the complicity, the inhuman acts, and the carefully planned fraud. R. Ickard Walker and his 2 accomplices, for aggravated assault, breaking and entering, unlawful imprisonment, and loan sharking. Rick is sentenced to 15 years in prison, his 2 accomplices to 7 years each. Monica Walker, for complicity in child abuse, and fraud for deceiving Chris about paternity. She is sentenced to 18 years in prison. Hearing the verdict, she slumped to the floor, crying silently, "I'm innocent." Elizabeth Evans, the judge paused for a moment. Despite symptoms of mental illness, which are the result of shock, after the truth was revealed. All criminal acts were committed with full awareness and premeditation. For being the main instigator of child abuse, causing grievous bodily harm, and incitement to commit a crime, the words, "beaten to death," she is sentenced to 20 years in prison. The muttering from the isolation room seemed to stop. And finally, Christopher Evans. His list of charges was the longest: embezzlement of property of great value, document forgery, assault, robbery, and as the direct guardian, neglect, and complicity in child abuse. The judge looked at the trembling, head-bowed Chris. The defendant, Christopher Evans, has lost his humanity, his greed leading him to trample on fatherly love and marital bonds. The judge took a deep breath. Herefore, the court, combining all sentences the defendant to life imprisonment, and orders the forfeiture of all his personal property. Life imprisonment, those two words hit like a hammer. It was all over. I closed my eyes, feeling no joy, no satisfaction, just a huge emptiness. The man I once loved, to whom I had dedicated my youth and trust, would spend the rest of his life in prison. He didn't raise his head, didn't react, sitting motionless like a soulless body. I slowly stood up and without looking back, left the courtroom. When I stepped outside, the sun blinded me, journalists swarmed me, flashes popped, microphones were shoved in my face. M.R.S. Adams, are you satisfied with the verdict? How do you feel? I said nothing, Mr. Miller and the guards hastily clearing a path for me. I just wanted to leave that place to go back to Jacob. Their trial was over, but my son's and my battle was just beginning. After the trial, I returned to reality. Sterling Homes, my father's legacy, was back in my hands, but it was no longer a respected construction company, just an empty shell saddled with a $5 million debt to loan sharks, a debt Chris had taken out in the company's name. Mr. Miller sat across from me in his office, his face full of concern. Afia, we have a few options. First, we can declare bankruptcy. In this situation, it's the fastest way to get rid of the burden. Except that you'll lose everything. My father's legacy, his entire life's work, was to go bankrupt because of one con man. My heart was breaking. Second, Mr. Miller continued, we can prove in civil court that Chris committed fraud, that this debt is his personal debt, not the company's. But Sophia, that will take a very long time, at least a few years, and loan sharks are not easy opponents. Rick is in prison, but his organization still exists. I was silent, thinking of Jacob, of my son, who was just beginning to regain his strength, who was just starting to walk and say simple words. I couldn't let him live in fear of threats and harassment from loan sharks for years to come, couldn't expose him to any more danger. I was tired of fighting in court, tired of hatred, just wanting a peaceful life for myself and for him. I looked at Mr. Miller, my gaze firm. Mr. Miller, the mansion is still in my name, right? Yes. Mr. Miller nodded. It's your personal property from before the marriage. The verdict ordered the forfeiture of Chris' personal property, but they can't touch the house. Please sell it, I said without hesitation. Mr. Miller was shocked. Sophia, what are you saying? That place is full of memories of your parents. No, I cut him off. They are no longer memories. That place is a crime scene, a place where my son was chained like an animal, where my husband choked me. Every brick in that house is tainted. I can't breathe there. I have to sell it. The decision was made. The mansion was in a good location and despite its notoriety, sold for a good price. I wanted to finalize the transaction as quickly as possible, even at a loss. The money didn't matter. I had to cut ties. When the money came in, I told Mr. Miller, with this money and whatever is left in the company, please pay off that $5 million debt. Sophia, have you gone mad? Mr. Miller jumped up. That's that scoundrel Chris debt. You have no obligation to pay a single penny. Why are you doing something so foolish? I looked at the lawyer and smiled warily. Mr. Miller, I'm not paying off Chris debt. I'm paying for my peace of mind. I'm paying for Jacob's safety. I don't want anything to do with the past anymore. $5 million for freedom and a complete break from the Evans and the loan sharks. To me, it's worth it. Mr. Miller looked at me for a long time, then sighed and shook his head. You've changed a lot. All right, I'll do as you wish. After paying off the debt, only the name Sterling Homes remained. I had lost almost my entire inherited fortune. I stood in front of the mansion one last time, watching the new owners move in. I had no regrets. I had paid the price for my mistake, the mistake of trusting the wrong man 6 years ago. It was an expensive lesson for $5 million. Our passed in the blink of an eye, and at the same time it dragged on for a century. I no longer lived in luxury, but I also no longer lived in fear. After selling the mansion, I used almost all the money to pay off Chris' $5 million debt. Mr. Miller said I was foolish, paying for someone else's sins out of my own pocket, but he didn't understand. I wasn't paying Chris' debt, I was buying my son's peace. I was buying freedom from the swamp of loan sharks in the past. With the remaining money, I bought a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a little ways from the city center. The apartment wasn't big, but it was always sunny. I was no longer a CEO or an heiress. I started working again, a simple job as a translator. The salary wasn't high, but it was enough for us to live a modest life. Jacob, my son, had changed a lot. In a year with me, a year of medical and psychological therapy, he had gained 20 lbs. No longer skinny as a skeleton, his cheeks filled out, chubby and cute, but he was still quiet. He could act and run, but still stumbled often. He spoke, but only single words, like, dirty, hungry, yummy, mama. Every word he spoke was a gift to me. He still had nightmares. Many nights he would scream in his sleep, waking up drenched in sweat and muttering, "Hot, don't." Then I would take him in my arms and hum the lullaby my mother used to sing to me. I knew this road to healing would be very long. That evening, I came home late from work. An urgent project had kept me at the office until almost 8:00 p.m. I rushed home with my heart in my throat, scared that the child being alone with the babysitter would get frightened, or think I had abandoned him again. I opened the door. The house was dark. My heart sank. Jacob, Mrs. Anna. No one answered. The sitter had already left. I had forgotten. She said she only worked until today. Where was Jacob, my son? I turned on the lights and hurriedly started calling for him. Jacob, Jacob, where are you? I ran into the bedroom, but he wasn't there, not in the kitchen either. I was going crazy. Where did you hide? Just then, the door of the old closet, where I kept his toys, moved slightly. I held my breath. He had hidden in there again. The doctor said it was trauma from being locked in the closet. I approached and said in a trembling voice, Jacob, are you in there? Mommy's home. The closet door slowly opened. Jacob came out with his head down, not looking at me. Mama mad, he said in a very quiet voice. I bad, Mama mad. I froze. No, Mommy's not mad. Why do you think Mommy would be mad? Mama late. He lifted his head, tears in his eyes, scared. Mama gone, like 5 years. My God, my son, my 7-year-old son knew what 5 years meant, knew I had left him, was afraid I would abandon him again. I felt my heart clench. What had I done? I dropped to my knees and hugged him, starting to sob. No, Mommy's sorry. I'm so sorry, honey. It's my fault I was late. I'll never go again. I'll never leave you. Jacob stiffened in my arms. He had probably never seen me cry like that, was surprised. His small thin hand hesitantly touched my cheek, wiping my tears and speaking, not a mumble or a single word, but a clear, loving call. Mama, he said in a clear voice. Mama, don't cry. I love Mama. I lifted my head, unable to believe my ears. What did you say, sweetie? Mama, he repeated, louder this time, hugging my neck and burying his small face in my shoulder. Mama's home. I hugged him tightly, feeling like I was holding the whole world in my arms, no longer crying from pain, but from happiness. After 5 years, after a year of fighting the past, my son had finally truly called me Mama. 2 years passed. Jacob is now 8 years old, couldn't go to a regular school. The psychological wounds were too deep and his development was delayed compared to his peers. I enrolled him in a special education center with qualified teachers. Today is the day of his periodic checkup, every 6 months at the city mental health hospital. This place is no longer scary to me. It's a place where doctors help me and my son recover fragments of his soul. I've learned to accept that my son won't be like other children, but he is my son, my only one. We were waiting for our turn in the hallway. Jacob sat politely next to me, looking at a picture book, no longer afraid of light or strangers, but still very quiet. While we were waiting, we heard a commotion at the end of the corridor. A group of people in prison-issue patient gowns was being escorted by police officers, probably going for checkups. Instinctively, I pulled Jacob closer, not wanting him to see such scenes, but then I froze. In that group was a thin gray-haired figure with disheveled hair, a woman in handcuffs walking, stumbling. It was her, Elizabeth Evans. She was no longer the ad mother-in-law in silk clothes shouting at everyone, just a patient, a prisoner. I didn't know if she was here for psychiatric treatment or a regular checkup. I quickly turned my head and pulled Jacob's hood over his head to cover his face. Keep reading, honey, don't look up, I whispered. Jacob obediently kept his head down, not understanding what was happening. The group passed us. I held my breath, praying they would pass quickly, but she, as if she felt something, suddenly stopping in front of me. I kept my head down, heart pounding. She didn't recognize me. My short hair, glasses, and current calm demeanor were very different from the daughter-in-law of 5 years ago. But she looked at Jacob. Jacob still had his head down, only a bit of his dark hair visible. Elizabeth stared at my son, her cloudy, empty eyes suddenly flashing a manic glint. Treasure, she whispered, her voice terrifying. My grandson. She reached out her dirty, cuffed hands toward my son. My grandson, give me back my grandson, let's go. The officer accompanying her shouted, pulling her arm hard. The tug made her stagger and almost fall, but she didn't care, struggling and turning back towards us, screaming, give me back my treasure, it's her, she's hiding my grandson, give him back. Her crazed screams echoed down the hall, people gathering to watch. I quickly picked Jacob up and ran into the doctor's office, slamming the door behind me. Jacob was trembling in my arms, not understanding what had happened, just scared. Mama, he muttered, that lady, crying. I hugged him tightly, trying to keep my voice from shaking, looking into his clear, innocent eyes. Why? Honey, I said, forcing a smile, that lady is sick, she's not well. But, I quickly wiped the cold sweat from my forehead. That has nothing to do with us anymore, Jacob, it will never have anything to do with us again. Jacob, come in. The doctor entered. I took a deep breath and sat my son on the chair. Elizabeth's screams could still be heard, but from a distance, a sound from another world, a world I had locked and bolted forever. 3 years have passed. My son is now 9 years old. A long journey behind us. He's grown a lot, no longer thin, filled out and become a charming boy, though still quiet and slow. He still goes to a special school, where he is loved and not judged by anyone. Today is a special day, the end-of-year school play. I took the whole day off to be with him. I was no low. We're rich, but I was a mother who had time. I sat in the parents section watching my son sit seriously in the students' row, clapping to the rhythm. Looking at him, I felt emotional. I remembered the image of a 6-year-old weighing 22 pounds, chained to a doghouse, and now I saw a 9-year-old, clean, warmly dressed, smiling at his friend. The contrast between that hell and the present, I don't think I'll ever forget it. I lost a great fortune, but I saved my son. The teacher came on stage and smiled. Today, our children have a special gift for you, which they have been preparing in secret for the last month. The children ran onto the stage, all holding drawings in their hands. Jacob ran out too, his step still a bit clumsy, but he was smiling. He ran up to me, hiding the drawing behind his back. Mama, he called out, his voice still a little unclear but proud. Present. He pushed a carefully folded drawing into my hand. I unfolded it, my heart freezing. It was a drawing, of course, a 9-year-old's drawing whose soul was 5, clumsy. He had drawn 2 people, a very large stick figure and a smaller one, standing, holding hands. Who is this? My voice broke, a lump forming in my throat. Jacob pointed to the large figure, Mama, and with pride, he pointed to the small figure, Jacob. I burst into tears, not sobs, but quiet tears of happiness. I looked at the 2 figures holding hands, both smiling. It's beautiful, son, I whispered, truly beautiful. But then I noticed one detail at the top of the drawing. He had drawn a sun, a very large sun taking up almost the entire top half of the paper, colored with all his might in a blindingly red color, and just like us, the sun was also smiling with a wide open mouth. I was surprised, and something hurt in my heart. Remembering the broken red crayon from that day, the red of heat and pain. I hugged him and tried to speak as normally as possible. Jacob, the drawing is really beautiful, but why did you color the sun such a bright red? Jacob looked at me, his eyes clear, surprised as if I had asked a very strange question, tilting his head. Because the sun is warm, Mama. I froze. Warm? Yes. He nodded with full conviction, like Mama. He raised his small hand and touched my cheek where tears were streaming down. Mama's hand is warm. Mama is warm. Good. My son no longer remembered hot as pain, and even if he did, he chose another meaning. chose warmth. Instead of the burning heat of cigarettes, he chose my warmth. I hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. Yes, you're right, son. I kissed his hair. Emma is warm. Mama will always be here to keep you warm forever. On a Sunday morning, I no longer had to rush to work. Jacob and I had a routine of watering the flowers on the balcony. Our apartment is small, but the balcony is sunny. I grew a few pots of roses and a bougainvillea vine. Jacob, now 9, held a small watering can and carefully watered each plant, very focused on this task as if it were the most important mission in the world. I stood beside him, quietly plucking dry leaves, watching my son. The morning sun illuminated his chubby face, his hair shining a light brown. The small circular scars on his arms, the cigarette burns, had faded a lot, only faint white dots remaining, reminders of a terrible past, but I knew they would never disappear, just like the scars in my heart, and in his memory. Sometimes news about them would reach me, not because I sought it out, but because Mr. Miller, as if part of the final legal formalities, would sometimes tell me about them. Chris is serving a life sentence in prison, apparently has written me many letters, belated letters of apology. Mr. Miller asked if I wanted to read them. I shook my head. I didn't need them. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, is not found in words. Elizabeth is still in a psychiatric hospital for prisoners. Her condition has not improved, still living in her own world of treasures and jinxes. Monica and Rick are paying for their actions with their youth in prison. Listening to Mr. Miller's words, I looked at them as characters in someone else's story. In my heart, there was no longer hatred, anger, or even pity, only peace. Justice had finally been served. They had reaped exactly what they had sown. I was no longer a wealthy heiress, had lost almost my entire fortune. I am now a single mother, working a regular job and raising a developmentally delayed child. Many people looking from the outside would say I had failed, that I was poor, but I have never felt so rich as I do now. I am rich because I have my son. I am rich because I have peace. Jacob finished watering the last pot, turned, smiled broadly at me, and handed me the empty watering can. Mama, no more water. I smiled and stroked his head. Good job, son. Suddenly, he pointed to the sky. Emma, son. I looked up. The sun was blindingly flooding our small balcony, warm and gentle. I took his small hand. Yes, that's right, son, I said softly. What a beautiful sun. I had passed through the longest winter of my life, lost a mansion, a company, a fortune, but I saved my son and I found summer. We are not perfect, we are survivors covered in scars, but we are alive and we are at peace. Whatever the future holds, we will walk it together holding hands under this sun. Thank you, dear listeners. I wish for all of us enough strength to cast away what is wrong, and enough love to start a new peaceful life. Until next time.